There is an ancient feeling that something is missing in the scriptures we know, as if between the lines of the text there were echoes of a deeper knowledge buried under centuries of translation, doctrines, and silence. Many have felt this, that strange intuition that the words of Jesus as they have come to us are incomplete, fragmented, as if they had been stripped of their original strength. What would happen if we discovered that he used a secret language? That his most intimate prayers were not recorded in the canonical Gospels, but whispered only to those who had ears to hear? What would these 7 voices mentioned in hidden Gospels be, and why has the official tradition never spoken about them? This story begins where the books have ended their words, in the void that remains between the texts and the soul. Throughout the centuries, many writings have been discarded, deemed heretical or too dangerous to be included in the dominant narrative. The so-called apocryphal Gospels and the Gnostic manuscripts found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, reveal fragments of teachings completely different from what became standard. In these texts, Jesus is not just a moral teacher, but a transmitter of hidden knowledge, guiding his closest disciples on deep spiritual practices. He spoke of invisible realms, layers of reality, and of a prayer that was not only said with words, but with the soul. A sacred language that was not taught to everyone, only to the initiated. Here begins the clue to the Gospel of the 7 voices. The mystical tradition has always preserved the secret that sound has creative power. In Genesis, everything begins with the Word. But in Jesus' world, this notion was even more complex. The Essenes, a group with which many scholars believe he had contact, practiced chanting rituals and silent prayer that they believed moved heavenly energies. In their view, there were spiritual frequencies that could only be accessed by elevated states of purity and intention. It was not just about speaking, but resonating. Jesus would have learned and perhaps expanded these practices, channeling a vibrational language used not to ask, but to align with the whole. This would be the basis of the first of the 7 voices. But what would these voices be? In many mystical accounts, both Gnostic and Kabbalistic, the 7 voices are linked to the 7 heavens, 7 states of the soul, 7 seals of inner revelation. Each voice would be a layer of the divine language, a bridge between the human and the sacred. They wouldn't be common sounds, but spiritual expressions with different intensities, destinations, and effects. The first voice connects the speaker to the earthly plane, while the last awakens unity with the infinite. This knowledge, highly symbolic and experiential, was not conveyed in words, but lived in silence, in ecstasy, in contemplation. In the Gnostic Gospels, particularly in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." This phrase, insistently repeated, was an invitation, not to ordinary hearing, but to the listening of the soul. The disciples who followed him closely reported that, during moments of prayer, Jesus entered an altered state of consciousness. His lips moved without making a sound, his body trembled slightly, and a powerful presence was felt around him. What he said in these moments was never recorded, but some texts suggest that these prayers contained the formulas for spiritual creation, the hidden names of God, the keys to the higher realms, and the opening of the soul's internal channels. For a long time, these practices were kept secret, passed from master to disciple in mystical traditions such as Sufism, Kabbalah, and Esoteric Christianity. It was not a secret to dominate, but a sacred care to protect the integrity of the power contained in these words. The ancients knew that which is too sacred to be profaned must be veiled. And so, the Gospel of the 7 voices remained in the shadows of history, preserved only in fragments, symbols, and echoes in spiritual practices scattered around the world. One of the great enigmas of the Gnostic texts is the presence of indecipherable words, like sound formulas. Zama, Zama, Oza, Rakhama. Many scholars have dismissed them as meaningless mystical inventions, but researchers of ancient languages and vibrational intonations have begun to notice something different. These phrases, when chanted with intention and rhythm, produced altered states of consciousness, profound inner peace, and in some cases, experiences of spiritual ecstasy. Could these words be connected to the voices that Jesus used in his secret prayers? Could they be remnants of the spiritual frequencies he accessed? This hypothesis gains strength when we realize that other spiritual cultures, such as Hinduism with its mantras, Buddhism with Tibetan chants, and shamanism with power songs, also use vibrational sounds for connection with the divine. Jesus, as an initiate and bearer of a deep spiritual lineage, might have been using the same principles in his own tradition. The difference is that, over time, his teaching was institutionalized, translated, adapted, and these vibrational aspects, which could not be captured in written words, were erased. This absence creates a fundamental gap in the way we understand prayer. Today, many see prayer as a request, a plea, or a formal ritual. But in the oldest mystical traditions, praying was tuning into the divine frequency. It was becoming one with the sound of creation, with the vibration of original love. What Jesus did in his prayers was not just talk to God, it was to merge with him, using these secret voices as vibrational ladders to the heavens, a practice that required preparation, inner silence, humility, and total surrender. If these voices still exist, where are they? Perhaps they are dormant within each human being. Maybe they are encoded in our cells, just waiting for the right activation. Or perhaps, in the quietest corners of the soul, fragments of what was once a lost language still echo, the language of light, of pure sound, of resonance with the sacred. And this is where our journey begins, not in search of words that can be translated, but of an experience that can be lived. The search for the seven voices is not a theological investigation, but a soul's journey towards its vibrational origin. In this first stage, we open the doors of mystery. We touch the edges of what has been hidden, silenced, and forgotten. The Gospel of the Seven Voices is not a book you will find in bookstores. It is revealed within slowly, as consciousness expands. The sacred language used in Jesus' secret prayers is a call, an invitation. And like every spiritual invitation, it starts with silence and ends with transformation. May we listen, not just with our ears, but with our spirit. There is a language that cannot be translated into words, a speech that hides in the pauses, in the deep breaths, and in the silences laden with intent. What Jesus did when he retreated to pray was not just a conversation with the divine, it was a complete immersion in an invisible communication, felt and not spoken, heard with the spirit and not with the ears. The silence was not absence, but fullness. Within it, meanings vibrated much deeper than any sentence. It is in this dimension that the sacred language truly dwells, not in the outward speech, but in the vibrational field that emanates from within the being. The sound, in this context, does not begin in the throat, but in the heart, in the center of the soul. And that is why only a few could understand what he said when he prayed in secret. Not because he spoke in indecipherable codes, but because his language was pure resonance with dimensions that most did not even perceive. The oldest spiritual traditions knew this. Sound was not just a form of expression, but a spiritual technology. Each vibration carried a specific energy field. Each tone was a key that opened a state of consciousness. Each frequency was a portal. The universe, the wise ones of antiquity claimed, was created by sound. And Jesus, immersed in this cosmic understanding, used his voice not as a common speech instrument, but as a vibrational transmission channel. His public words were laden with teachings, but his private prayers, those intoned when no one saw him, were silent chants of spiritual activation. He did not just speak to God, he tuned in with the heart of the universe, like a harp tuned by pure intention and absolute love. Upon examining mystical accounts and apocryphal fragments, we see that the repetition of certain sound patterns, or even their absence, was fundamental in secret rituals. Jesus used long pauses between sentences, breathed deeply before pronouncing certain names, and often murmured words that had no linguistic meaning, but carried spiritual power. These sounds were not intended to be understood with the intellect, but to be felt with the soul. Some traditions say that he knew the true name of the Father, a sound impossible to pronounce without altering the body's vibrational state, a sound that could only be revealed within deep silence, where the ego dissolves and the spirit manifests. This type of language was not learned in schools, nor was it taught with grammar. It was received through direct revelation, through experience, through inner surrender. Therefore, many could not understand his deepest teachings. They expected clear instructions, rules, structured sentences. But what Jesus offered was the gateway to a new type of communication, where understanding was born from shared silence, from the gaze that transmitted peace, from the vibration that permeated the atmosphere. Those who were attentive felt something different when he spoke. It was not just what he said, it was what was generated in the air around him. A magnetic field that enveloped everyone, an echo of something that came from far beyond words. This phenomenon is linked to a forgotten science, the spiritual science of sound and consciousness. Today, with the advancement of quantum physics and neuroscience, we are beginning to understand that words hold power not through their meaning, but through the frequency they carry. Hearts connected in silence generate heart coherence. Sounds emitted with intention affect the molecular structure of water. Loving words reorganize the electromagnetic field of a room. What Jesus did was to utilize these spiritual laws in their highest form. He spoke to creation through pure vibration because he knew that reality responded not to content, but to frequency. Prayer, then, was not a plea. It was an encoding of reality. The 7 voices mentioned in the hidden gospel are not 7 distinct languages in the conventional sense. They represent 7 distinct vibrational modes, 7 levels of spiritual emission. The first voice is that of the physical body, the language of gesture, of audible sound. The second is that of feeling, the vibration of the heart. The third is that of the higher mind, thoughts that become clear intentions. The fourth voice is that of the spirit, the emanation of the soul in its pure form. The fifth is that of communion, where the self dissolves into unity with everything. The sixth is that of creation, the word that manifests. And the seventh, the most sacred, is absolute silence, the origin point of all the others. Jesus knew each of these layers and moved between them according to the depth of the prayer he performed. In some hidden passages of the Pistis Sophia, we find moments when Jesus sings hymns to the Father. However, these hymns are not recorded in the manuscripts. What was he chanting? Why were these songs not preserved? The hypothesis most accepted by mystics and esoteric scholars is that such prayers could not be captured in text, as they were sounds that did not belong to the common alphabet. They were sacred expressions, chanted with vibrational sounds that acted directly on the soul and subtle fields. Their language was alive. It created, moved, transformed. It was not described, it was experienced. Therefore, only the initiated, those who were spiritually ready, could receive these transmissions without them being corrupted or lost. This pattern repeats itself in various traditions. The Vedas speak of Nada Brahma, sound is the essence of God. Kabbalists teach that Hebrew letters are expressions of the forces of creation, and that the ineffable name of God, the sacred tetragrammaton, is not to be pronounced but meditated upon. Islamic mystics use the recitation of the 99 names of Allah as a vibrational practice, and Jesus, inserted in this spiritual context of the Middle East, would certainly have access to this knowledge. His sacred language was an ancestral sound, present before creation, and by pronouncing it, he not only connected with God, he reconnected all of creation with the source. If we consider prayer as a bridge, then common words are merely loose planks. It's the vibration with which they are spoken that constructs the full path. Jesus understood this profoundly. When he prayed, his intention was so pure, his presence so aligned, that even silence carried spiritual weight. He spoke little, but transformed much. Because his words came from a place where the ego no longer exists, where only truth resonates. This is the essence of sacred silence, where there is no need to speak, because everything has already been understood in an instant of full unity with the whole. What remains today of this wisdom? We still feel, in moments of true peace, this silent vibration. When we enter deep meditation, when we listen to music that touches us beyond the mind, when we pray with a heart in tears, there, without a single word, we connect with something greater. This is the sacred language. It is not in books, but in the being. It does not translate, but reveals itself. And perhaps, throughout this journey through the 7 voices, the real teaching is not to find new words, but to learn to listen to what has always been whispering within us, waiting to be heard. In the silence, Jesus said everything, and in the pauses between his words, he hid the greatest secrets. The sacred language is not an invention, but a memory, something the soul recognizes when the mind finally falls silent. The 7 voices are not noises, but states of vibration that open internal portals. And each one of us, upon touching this silence, begins to rediscover the forgotten language that still sings within the heart, where the essence of true prayer resides. From ancient times, mystics, prophets, and spiritual seekers have understood that reality is not flat, but composed of invisible layers that interpenetrate each other. Human consciousness likewise does not operate on a single plane, but transitions between different states, ranging from the densest and most material to the most subtle and divine. The 7 voices mentioned in the apocryphal writings attributed to the secret teachings of Jesus were not just mystical sounds, but symbolic representations of these inner layers of the soul. Each voice corresponds to a level of consciousness that a human being can reach through inner purification, spiritual awakening, and alignment with the supreme truth. When Jesus spoke of these voices, he was not referring to tones or foreign languages, but to spiritual states encoded in resonances. Each of these voices is a gateway, and each gateway leads to a new vision of reality, completely transforming the way one perceives oneself, others, and the divine. The first voice is that of survival, that of full incarnation on the physical plane. It is the sound of instinct, of the body, of the flesh. It represents the starting point of the soul's journey, where everything is governed by the need to stay alive. Here, prayer is a plea, a cry for protection, food, safety. Consciousness is still immersed in the illusion of separation, and God is seen as an external, distant power that must be invoked to solve earthly problems. The first voice is raw, intense, emotionally charged. Its tone resonates at the densest frequencies of existence, and although it may seem primitive, it is essential, for it is in the flesh that the path of redemption begins. Jesus did not ignore this dimension. He welcomed it, for he knew that even the highest spirit needs a body to manifest love on earth. The second voice is that of emotion. Here, the soul begins to awaken to sensitivity, to emotional bonds, and to heartaches. Prayer becomes a cry for connection, for inner healing, for meaning. The language used at this level is not rational, it's vibrational. Words emerge laden with deep feelings, tears, joy, and pain. This voice is often misunderstood because it speaks through pure emotion, without filters. It's at this stage that many have their first true encounters with the sacred, because they feel. Jesus welcomed the crowds with compassion precisely because he resonated with this voice. He saw their pains, their wounds, and prayed not just with words, but with the vibration of comfort. The second voice is the voice of empathy, and upon accessing it, the soul begins to remember its loving nature. The third voice is that of the awakened mind. At this level, consciousness expands into understanding. Deep questions arise. Who am I? What is the meaning of all this? Prayer changes in tone. It is no longer plea or emotional outburst, but contemplation. The language of the third voice is philosophical, reflective, symbolic. Jesus used parables precisely to reach this level. He provoked the mind not to generate empty reasoning, but to lead it to living thought, the kind that opens space for the mystery and accepts not knowing as a sacred state. The third voice is the beginning of spiritual wisdom, the point where the soul begins to decipher the signs of the invisible and realizes that reality is shaped by consciousness. The fourth voice is that of spiritual intuition. At this level, the mind quiets, and the heart opens to a kind of knowledge that does not come from reasoning, but from direct perception. Prayer here becomes full silence, presence, contemplation of the divine in everything. Jesus entered this state when he retreated to the mountains, alone, during long vigils. He asked for nothing. He simply dissolved in the presence of the Father. The language of the fourth voice is internal, almost imperceptible. They are sudden insights, visions, spontaneous revelations. Here, the ego no longer dictates the rules. The human being begins to act driven by a higher will, by the voice of the soul that whispers with sweet but firm authority. This voice connects the speaker with the angels, with the masters, with universal wisdom. The fifth voice is that of unity. It's when consciousness transcends dualism and experiences that everything is interconnected. There is no longer prayer as a separate act. Living becomes prayer. Every gesture, every thought, every word is a living offering. Jesus expressed this voice when he said, "I and the Father are one." At this level, language is pure intention. Words are almost unnecessary, as the being is in constant communion with the whole. It is in this state that miracles occur, not as breaks in the natural laws, but as expressions of the true order of the universe. The fifth voice is the voice of the creative word, one that manifests not what the ego wants, but what existence needs. The soul, at this point, is a pure channel of the divine. The sixth voice is that of conscious manifestation. Here, the soul is so aligned with the divine that its words, thoughts, and actions become direct instruments of the sacred will. It is the voice of spiritual command, of creation through the word. Jesus used this voice when he said, "Rise and walk." It was not a request, but a vibrational order issued from a point of consciousness so high that reality had no choice but to obey. This voice is rare because it requires total purity of intention, absolute absence of ego. It cannot be forced nor learned. It emerges when the soul completely surrenders to the source and becomes one with it. It is the language of the avatars, of the great masters, of the fully awakened beings. The seventh voice is the sacred silence, the end point and the point of origin. It is the state where duality completely disappears and the being plunges into the infinite. There is no more prayer because there is no more separation. The speaker and the divine ear are one. Sound and silence become indistinguishable. This is the voice that Jesus accessed in his deepest moments of communion. A voice that does not emit sound, but resonates in the heart of the universe. It cannot be heard with the ears, nor understood with the mind. It can only be experienced. It is in this silence that all other voices rest. It is in it that all words dissolve. The seventh voice is the origin of everything, the field where God reveals himself as pure presence. Understanding the seven voices is to comprehend the journey of the soul from the dust of the earth to divine light. It's realizing that Jesus' language was not a technique, but a direct expression of his total integration with the cosmos. He prayed differently because he saw the world differently. His consciousness vibrated at a frequency beyond common understanding, and his words carried that code. Those who were awake felt it. Those who weren't only heard beautiful stories. The difference was not in the sound, but in the level of consciousness of the listener. That's why Jesus said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." He was talking about the inner voices that only awaken when the soul begins to remember who it really is. Each of us carries these voices. They are not outside nor lost. They are silenced, asleep, waiting to be activated. And each time we seek the truth sincerely, each time we pray with an open heart, each time we quieten to hear what life whispers, one of these voices awakens within us. The journey is not to learn to speak like Jesus, but to live with the same consciousness he manifested. And on this path, prayer ceases to be something we do. It becomes what we are. The seven voices are maps of the soul. They are steps of ascension. They are expressions of the sacred that lives within each of us. And when understood, they not only transform our way of praying, but of living, of loving, of existing. Because they reveal what has always been hidden. That the true divine language isn't found in the words we speak, but in the frequency we are able to sustain in silence, with our hearts completely surrendered to the mystery. There exists a language that doesn't depend on audible sounds or written alphabets, a language that doesn't need to be learned, as it has already been inscribed in the deepest layers of the soul, even before incarnation. This language is made of light. Not light in the physical sense, but light as pure consciousness, as intelligible vibration that carries meanings impossible to be reduced to words. Jesus, in the highest moments of his spiritual practices, used this form of luminous expression to connect directly with the source. That's why many ancient accounts describe his face glowing during his prayers, or a kind of subtle brightness enveloping his body when he entered states of deep connection. The language of light is not a poetic metaphor. It's a spiritual reality that the great masters have always used, and that modern science is just beginning to suspect. Words, when originated in the spirit, are more than sounds. They are vehicles of light transmission. Each verb, intoned with purity, carries a vibrational spark that propagates through the invisible field and generates real effects. Jesus knew this, and that's why he chose his words with spiritual precision, not rhetoric. He understood that the universe does not respond to the empty word, but to the word coated with vibrational truth. His teachings were imbued with an energy that penetrated beyond the intellect and reached the essence of those who heard him. When he said, "Thy will be done," he was not just declaring submission to the divine will. He was aligning his own frequency to the light of the infinite, becoming a channel for that will to manifest through him. This is sacred language, the fusion between intention, sound, and pure consciousness. The hidden and mystical Gospels reveal passages where Jesus uses expressions such as words of power, names of light, and prayers that cannot be written. These terms are clear indications that he accessed a non-linear linguistic dimension where communication took place from essence to essence, not from mind to mind. At certain moments, he conveyed teachings with just a look or with a breath. There are accounts where a simple touch of his hands produced immediate understanding in those who received it. This is because the true meaning was not in the external form, but in the vibrational quality of the gesture. The language of light is made of this: pure intention, living silence, total presence. It crosses the veil of common language and communicates directly with the soul, awakening within it that which was dormant. In many spiritual traditions, there is the belief that higher beings communicate through light and frequency. Angels, cosmic beings, and higher consciousness do not use verbal language, but rather packets of information encoded in light. These codes are absorbed directly by the energy field of the receptive being, generating expanded states of consciousness, visions, healings, and instant understandings. When Jesus prayed, he tuned into these higher bands of reality, receiving not only inspiration but clear instructions on what to do, where to go, what to say. This luminous communication guided his steps with divine precision, not because he was guessing the future, but because he walked in perfect resonance with the intelligent flow of the universe. The language of light can also be understood as living geometry, vibrational shapes that structure reality. The ancients knew that each sacred sound generated a geometric pattern, as proven today by cymatic studies, which show how sound organizes matter into symmetrical shapes. Jesus, when chanting his secret prayers, not only pronounced sacred names, he drew these vibrational shapes in the invisible, aligning himself with cosmic harmony structures that operated beyond the physical plane. These shapes were activated within him and around him, like sonorous mandalas that reconfigured energy fields and realities. When someone was healed by him, it was not only through faith, but because the vibration of light he radiated reordered the vibrational matrix of the person's body, eliminating imbalance and restoring divine order. The very concept of word as the origin of everything is tied to this idea. In the Gospel of John it reads, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." This passage, often reduced to a theological view, is actually an esoteric key. The Word is not the spoken word. It is the vibration of conscious light that sustains and manifests creation. Jesus, being a full incarnation of this vibrational consciousness, spoke not only with his mouth but with his entire being. Every cell of his body emitted a specific frequency of love, wisdom, and unity. This was his true language, and that's why crowds felt touched by him, even without rationally understanding what he was saying. The light he transmitted spoke directly to the spirit, breaking through the barriers of the mind. This language also manifests itself in dreams, in intuitions, in states of deep meditation. When a person connects with higher levels of consciousness, they often receive images, symbols, or sounds that make no rational sense, but carry profound truths. These are fragments of the language of light, which expresses itself in non-linear ways, activating parts of consciousness that were dormant. Jesus, in his prayers, received these transmissions, and already being awake, understood them instantly. He knew how to decode these messages because his soul was clean, tuned, available. And when speaking with his disciples, he tried to translate these understandings into parables and metaphors, bringing the ineffable closer to human language. The language of light is also liberating because it cannot be controlled by institutions nor captured by dogmas. It reveals itself to each being to the extent of their inner openness. It does not depend on sacred books, rituals, or intermediaries. It occurs in the silence of true prayer, in sincere surrender, in the burning desire to know the truth beyond appearances. Jesus taught this with his example. He did not demand worship, but presence. He did not seek temples, but pure hearts. Because he knew that it is in the innermost of the being that the light speaks, that the divine word resonates, that the connection is established. The temple was the body, the altar, the heart, and the sacred language, a frequency that only love can tune. Therefore, understanding this language is not an intellectual effort, but a journey of inner purification. It is necessary to empty oneself of the noise of the world, dissolve the voices of the ego, silence the fragmented mind, and make room for the luminous silence of the spirit to speak. The words that come out of the mouth only carry light when they come from the center of the being. Otherwise, they are just empty echoes. Jesus, with his pure vibration, showed that it is possible to live and speak from this place, the center of the heart, where the divine spark resides. There, every word is sacred. There, every breath is a prayer. Throughout life, we are invited to remember this forgotten language. In moments of silence, contemplation, deep pain, or indescribable ecstasy, this language reveals itself. It reconnects us with what has never left us, but we have forgotten, our divine origin. And upon remembering, we begin to speak in a new way, to listen in a new way, to live with a new rhythm. We become channels of light, bridges between heaven and earth, living voices of the primordial word. The language of light is the language of the soul when it aligns with the infinite. It is the bridge that reconnects us to the Creator, not through religion, but through resonance. Jesus taught us to walk on the waters of consciousness, not to impress, but to remind us that we are made of something much vaster than we were led to believe. When he prayed with the language of light, he was not only communicating with the Father, he was restoring, healing, illuminating everyone around him. And even today, those who tune into this frequency can hear his call, not in words, but in pure presence. In 1945, an Egyptian peasant named Muhammad Ali made a discovery that would forever change the spiritual history of humanity. Buried within clay jars in a cave near the city of Nag Hammadi were over 50 ancient texts on parchment bound in leather. These manuscripts, written in Coptic, revealed gospels and teachings that had been completely excluded from the official versions of Christianity. They were considered dangerous, heretical, and banned by the councils of the early church, but there they were, intact, preserved for millennia. Among them, names like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and the enigmatic Pistis Sophia. The content of these texts not only provided an alternative version of the life and words of Jesus, but primarily something much deeper: secret prayers, spiritual hymns, and a language of mystery used only among the closest disciples. Upon delving into these Gospels, it becomes clear that Jesus' focus was not on founding a religion, but on awakening the inner divinity of each human being. He did not position himself as the only Son of God, but as a spiritual master who had accessed the totality of the Spirit and wished to guide others to this same realization. In the teachings recorded in these manuscripts, the figure of Christ is that of a bearer of ancient wisdom, transmitting to his disciples knowledge about the workings of the cosmos, the invisible structure of the soul, and the paths to reintegration with the primordial light. And among these teachings, one of the most powerful aspects are the secret prayers, chanted in moments of profound revelation and communion with the higher spheres. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus states, "If those who lead you say to you, 'See, the kingdom is in heaven,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they tell you, "It is in the sea," then the fish will precede you, but the kingdom is within you and around you. These words reveal an essential key to Gnostic spirituality. The divine is not external, but internal. True prayer, then, is not directed at a distant God, but is a process of reconnecting with this inner divine spark. In the Gnostic manuscripts, there are prayers that are not petitions, but vibrational formulas, sacred mantras, and hymns that evoke luminous presences, restore spiritual memory, and open internal portals to the celestial worlds. These prayers are treated as technologies of the spirit, precise practices that require preparation, alignment, and purity. In Pistis Sophia, one of the most complex and profound works found in Nag Hammadi, Jesus is depicted transmitting teachings after his resurrection for 11 years to his closest disciples, including Mary Magdalene, John, and James. There, he teaches about the aeons, the archons, the veils that separate the worlds, and the paths of the soul upon return to the kingdom of light. At various moments, he chants prayers to assist Sophia, an emanation of light that had fallen into the lower worlds, to return to her state of glory. These prayers are lengthy, intricate, and often composed of sacred names that are not intellectually comprehensible, but carry within them a power of spiritual resonance. They are mystical formulas that act as vibrational compasses, guides for souls seeking to return to their divine origin. These prayers reveal a side of Jesus rarely explored, that of an initiatory master who operated within a very ancient spiritual lineage, where the use of sound, vibration, and hidden knowledge were essential tools for spiritual ascension. In many of these texts, we find passages where Jesus guides his disciples in invocations that begin with expressions like, "Hear me, O lights of the higher realms, O hidden divine forces," and then follows a series of words that seem untranslatable, such as Zoxatha, Zama Zama, or Zurach. These are not random words. They are spiritual codifications that, according to these manuscripts, create direct connections with celestial planes, piercing the veils that separate us from the totality of existence. In the Gospel of Philip, there are statements that directly touch the heart of the mystery. The truth did not come naked into the world, but in symbols and images. The world cannot receive it any other way. This reveals that Jesus conveyed his knowledge through symbols, sounds, and rituals that carried more than mere meaning. They carried spiritual potency. That's why the prayers described in these texts often seem disjointed to the modern mind. They were not meant to be understood, but to be lived, chanted, absorbed with the soul. They were transmissions that occurred between awakened souls and could only be received by those who had already silenced the voices of inner illusion. Mainstream scholars have ignored these texts for centuries, labeling them as heresy or fantasy. But as humanity awakens to multidimensional realities, more and more people begin to realize that the Gnostic Gospels carry a type of wisdom that resonates with inner truths that were not taught but remembered, because these secret prayers were not created but channeled from higher sources. Jesus did not invent his prayers. He aligned himself with the heavenly planes and let the light speak through him. When he said that he prayed to the Father in secret, it was not a metaphor. It was a literal description of his spiritual practices, performed at levels of consciousness so high that common words could not even touch them. It's important to understand that these texts do not deny the canonical Gospels. They expand them. They reveal a more intimate, profound, and cosmic dimension of Jesus' mission. They show that beyond the public master who healed and preached, there was a silent initiate conducting powerful spiritual practices, whispered in small groups, under the protection of the unseen. The prayers of these texts were not public, as they required an inner preparation that few were ready to experience. But now, in this time of revelations, these words return to the world as invitations to those who feel the call of the Spirit. The hidden prayers of Christ are not only in ancient manuscripts. They still live today, inscribed in the field of universal consciousness, accessible to anyone willing to quiet down, purify themselves, and delve deeply into their own being. The sacred names chanted by Jesus continue to resonate in the subtle realms, waiting to be rediscovered and activated. Each of these names is a note of the divine symphony. Each prayer, a path back to the origin. Each word, a bridge between the finite and the eternal. When we read these prayers with an open heart, something happens. It's not the mind that understands. It's the soul that remembers. There is an inner shudder, a whisper, a recollection that we have heard this before, somewhere outside of time. Because these words do not come to us from the outside, they emerge from within, and by chanting them with reverence, we access the same vibrational fields that Jesus accessed. We touch the same light, hear the same silence, feel the same love, and we understand without words what has always been hidden, that true prayer is not a speech but a fusion, and that in the depths of this fusion all voices become one, the voice of the soul calling back home. Prayer, when stripped of the cultural and institutional layers that have been added over the centuries, reveals itself as one of the most advanced spiritual tools humanity has ever known. Far from being a simple devotional act or a request directed towards a higher entity, it manifests as a mechanism of realignment between individual consciousness and the subtle fields that sustain the universe. Jesus understood this truth profoundly. For him, prayer was not a repetitive ritual, but a high-precision spiritual device. Each time he withdrew to pray, he was not just speaking to God, he was recalibrating his frequency, reconnecting with his cosmic origin, and reconfiguring the energy matrix around him. It was a conscious spiritual operation, directed with real, measurable, and permanent effects in the vibrational field. This view of prayer as spiritual technology finds parallels in various ancient traditions. Shamans would chant sacred songs to alter states of consciousness and interact with spirits of nature. Yogis recited mantras that activated internal energy centers, the so-called chakras. Jewish Kabbalists meditated on the secret names of God as keys that opened higher spiritual realities. In all these cases, prayer was an active, transformative practice that produced tangible effects both in the practitioner and in the environment. Jesus, as a universal master who synthesized these traditions, used prayer as a living technology. He knew the hidden mechanisms of creation and knew how to operate in them through directed consciousness, sound, presence, and pure intention. At the heart of this practice lies the principle that everything in the universe is energy and vibration. Nothing is static, everything pulses at frequencies. Matter, thought, emotions, everything is vibration. Prayer in this context is an act of consciously emitting frequency. It doesn't rely on specific words, but on the coherence between intention, emotion, and consciousness. When someone prays with a heart full of love, truth, and surrender, their vibration rises and aligns with the more subtle fields of the universe. It's as if they open a door to higher realities where the laws of time and space no longer apply. Jesus used this vibrational elevation to access information, perform healings, and manifest states that seemed miraculous to common eyes. But there was no magic, just spiritual science applied with mastery. Prayer, therefore, can be understood as a spiritual software, a conscious programming of reality. When used with knowledge and purity, it restructures mental patterns, dissolves emotional blocks, strengthens the energy field, and attracts invisible forces of support and wisdom. Jesus did not teach generic prayers. He taught postures of consciousness. When he said, "When you pray, go into your inner room," he was speaking of an internal state, not a physical space. This room is the center of being, the sanctuary of the soul, where true prayer takes place. It is there that the word becomes the creating verb. It is there that the human spirit finds the frequency of the divine spirit, and from this fusion the true miracle is born, the reconnection with the source. In his moments of prayer, Jesus activated high vibration fields around him. It was not uncommon for people to feel warmth, light, deep peace, or even have visions and spontaneous healings just by being near him while he prayed. This happened because when entering prayer, he altered his own electromagnetic field, raising its frequency to the point of becoming a transmitter of divine power. Prayer was, for him, an act of inner transfiguration, a sacred technology that allowed transcending the limits of matter and operating from a point of unity with the whole. He did not pray to ask, but to tune in. And this tuning was so precise that reality responded to him like a clean mirror. What he emanated, manifested. In the context of prayer as technology, it is understood that there are different types of prayer, each with specific functions. There are purification prayers, which cleanse internal channels and dissolve emotional and mental residues. There are elevation prayers, which connect with higher spheres of consciousness. There are manifestation prayers, which act directly in the creation of new realities. There are surrender prayers, which dissolve the ego and allow divine wisdom to guide the way. And there are silence prayers, which transcend all forms and immerse the self in the pure essence of being. Jesus mastered all these layers. His use of prayer was surgical, precise, subtle. He knew exactly which vibration to emit for each situation, which frequency to activate, which silence to sustain. The effects of prayer go beyond the spiritual realm. Modern scientific studies show that sincere prayers, made with intention and presence, affect brain function, reduce stress levels, increase heart coherence, and promote balance in the nervous system. But these are just the visible effects. What we still can't measure is the impact that prayer has on the invisible fields, on the soul, ancestral patterns, spiritual memories we carry. True prayer not only improves health, it transforms the being from the inside out. It's a technology that acts on the human vibrational structure, reconnecting it with its original matrix. Jesus used this technology not to impress, but to teach that everyone has access to this power, as long as they learn to pray with the spirit and not with the mouth. Prayer, as a spiritual technology, also requires responsibility, because everything that is emitted returns. Jesus warned, "By your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." This is not punishment, it's vibration. What we speak with intention shapes our vibrational field. A prayer filled with fear, doubt, or anger does not generate the same effects as a prayer loaded with faith, surrender, and love. Therefore, the quality of the internal state is more important than the external form. Jesus did not teach ready-made formulas, but states of being. He wanted each person to access the Spirit for themselves, without intermediaries, without empty repetitions, without dependence on external structures. Prayer was, for him, a tool of liberation, not submission. When understood as technology, prayer ceases to be a last resort and becomes a constant practice of alignment. Each day, each moment can be an opportunity for reconnection. There's no need to wait for a crisis to pray. Continuous, silent, present prayer transforms the human being into a permanent channel of light. And this was Jesus's hidden message, not to pray merely to obtain something, but to pray to become something, a living reflection of the divine presence. Prayer then becomes the path itself, and every word, every breath, every silence, a cog in this sacred mechanism. Prayer is not an end, but a means of remembering who one is, of restoring lost wholeness, of rebuilding the bridge between the human and the divine. And like all true technology, it is not learned merely from books, it is awakened through experience. Jesus prayed with the body, with the heart, with the spirit. His prayer was life in its purest form. It was light being emanated. It was heaven descending to earth. And by doing so, he showed us that the path is open, that this same technology is accessible to all who dare to seek, feel, silence, and surrender. In essence, prayer is the most sophisticated act of the human soul. It's the vibrational remembrance of your origin. It's the interface between the visible and the invisible world, between sound and silence, between time and eternity. And this is what Jesus tried to reveal, that within each human being there is a temple, an antenna, a key. That prayer is this gateway, and that when we cross it, we do not find an answer. We find ourselves in the heart of the light. Long before any written language, even before humans communicated through articulated words, there was a sound, a primordial sound, predating matter, time, and form. This sound could not be heard with physical ears, for it was not noise. It was pure vibration, living presence. It was the sound that reverberated in the void before the universe emerged, the silent echo of absolute consciousness. In many spiritual traditions, this sound is considered the origin of all that exists. In the East, it is called Aum. In the Hebrew tradition, it is concealed within the 4 characters of the sacred Tetragrammaton, Yod, He, Vav, He. For the Gnostics and initiates, It is a formless sound, impossible to fully represent, for it is beyond human language. Jesus knew this sound. He chanted it in secret. He reverberated it in his deepest prayers. He understood that this sound was not just the origin of the universe, but the vibration that sustained all creation. In the hidden Gospels, there are repeated mentions of secret divine names, sound expressions that Jesus taught only to prepared disciples. These formulas were not just combinations of letters, but vibrational keys, sacred encodings that allowed access to higher realities. At various times in the Pistis Sophia, Jesus intones long sequences of names, among them Iu, Yewa, Zama Zama, or Rakama, Yabroth, Abraxas, Thautha, Melchizedek. These words, at first glance meaningless to the modern intellect, are remnants of a primordial language, the language of pure sound. Each sacred name represents a specific frequency of the divine. They do not describe God, they are God in vibrational manifestation, and by pronouncing them with awareness and reverence, the practitioner aligns themselves with the frequency that the name represents, becoming one with that emanation of the eternal. Jesus did not use the divine names as magical incantations, but as tools for spiritual tuning. When he pronounced these words, he did so with total presence, precise breathing, a clear heart, and an aligned mind. Each syllable was a bridge, each intonation a ladder. These names were not just invocations, they were living frequencies. When he said Abba, he was not just calling for the Father, he was vibrating with the Father's presence. The sound and intention combined, and the name became an active vibrational field. This is a profound spiritual technology which requires total awareness. Because pronouncing a sacred name without being in tune with its frequency is like playing an instrument without knowing how to tune it. The sound comes out, but the music is not born. The importance of the primordial sound in the tradition of Jesus is directly linked to the notion that the universe is structured by frequencies. Modern science, especially quantum physics and string theory, is beginning to confirm what spiritual masters have always known. Everything vibrates. Everything is sound in a subtle state. Matter is not solid, it's condensed music. And if everything is vibration, then whoever masters sound masters reality. Jesus understood this perfectly. He knew that the right sound, emitted with the correct intention and necessary inner purity, could move mountains, literally. When he said, "Lazarus, rise and walk," he was not just making a request, he was emitting an exact vibration, resonating with the field of life, activating the frequency of regeneration, and the miracle happened. But for him, it was not a miracle, it was divine science. In the innermost circles of his disciples, Jesus taught that sacred names should not be used lightly. They required preparation. Vibrational prayer was preceded by fasting, silence, purifications, and long hours of contemplation. Because the divine name is not something external, it must be awakened from within. Each name he taught was also a mirror. It reflected a part of the soul that needed to be activated, integrated, transcended. Therefore, when chanting a name like Iu, the practitioner was not merely calling upon a spiritual entity. He was awakening within himself the corresponding frequency, the light of that divine consciousness asleep within his being. And this process, repeated with devotion and consistency, led to the complete transformation of the being. The sacred music, the secret hymns, and the chants sung by Jesus and his disciples were ways to access this primordial sound. There were no sophisticated instruments nor decorated lyrics. Only the human voice, vibrating with the heart, creating fields of light around. These chants were not made to entertain or excite. They were tools of alignment. They transformed the environment. They elevated the vibration of those present. They cleansed atmospheres. They healed bodies. Because these were not ordinary songs, they were manifestations of the creative sound, resonating through prepared human bodies. And that's why in some hidden passages, the disciples report that they felt levitating or experiencing deep ecstasies when they prayed with Jesus. It wasn't hypnosis, it was frequency. The reverence that Jesus had for the divine names was absolute. He taught that the true name of God could not even be pronounced in its entirety. It was a sound so pure, so essential, that it could only be experienced. never spoken. This name, according to some traditions, is the sound of being itself. Everyone carries within them a particle of this name, and all spiritual life is a journey of remembrance, of returning to this lost vibration. When a human being rediscovers their original vibration, they reconnect with the sacred name that created them. And in that instant, the primordial sound reverberates again through them. That's why Jesus said, "If you knew what I know, you would do what I do, and even greater things." He was not talking about power. He was talking about attunement. The Gnostic tradition teaches that there are 7 main sacred names, each corresponding to a dimension of the soul, a level of the cosmos, a voice of prayer. These names are ancient secrets, veiled by symbols, protected by oaths, safeguarded for centuries. But their essence is available to anyone who seeks sincerely. It is not necessary to know the exact pronunciation, nor to know the original spelling. What matters is the internal vibration. The soul recognizes the true sound, and when it hears it, even if from within, something opens, warms, ignites. This is the spiritual memory awakening, and this memory is the key that opens the doors of the inner temple, where the name resides. The ancient mystery schools taught that the primal sound was not heard with the ears, but with the heart. It vibrated in the center of the chest, like a silent resonance, like a soundless chant that sustained life. Jesus, when teaching about the kingdom of God, referred to this internal vibration. The kingdom is within you because the name vibrates within you. Reconnecting with this sound is the return home. The most powerful prayer is the one that restores this attunement. When someone achieves this harmony, duality disappears, fear dissolves, separation extinguishes. The name and the being become one, and then the primal sound is no longer something to be sought. It's the very being that vibrates with it, that lives as it, that prays with it, without words, without effort, just with presence. This mystery has been safeguarded for centuries, not to be hidden, but to be protected. Because the primordial sound is not a spiritual toy, it is a creative force. Those who access it change. Those who activate it transform. Those who embody it become a channel of the infinite. Jesus was this channel, and his invitation was not to worship him, but to remember through him what we also are. Bearers of the name, extensions of the sound, voices of the word, fragments of the singing silence. The language of the heart is not made of words, but of presence. It is born in the silence that precedes the sound, in the pure vibration that comes before form. It is a language that doesn't need to be learned because it already resides within us from the beginning, forgotten only by the mind that has drifted away from the essence. For Jesus, this was the most powerful language, the one that springs from the center of the being and reaches the infinite without needing to cross through reason. In all his gestures, teachings, and prayers, the heart was the center of vibrational emission, not just as a symbol of love, but as a point of convergence between the human and the divine. Jesus did not speak to people's intellect. He spoke directly to their divine spark. And that's why his word touched so deeply. It wasn't the content, it was the vibration of pure love overflowing from each expression, each silence, each breath. In the heart lies the center of spiritual coherence. When the heart feels what the mind thinks and the body does, resonance arises. This coherence is what makes prayer genuine. It is not the eloquence of words that attracts the divine, but the purity of the vibration that emanates from the heart. Jesus understood this deeply. His prayers were not beautiful poetic compositions. They were living pulses of absolute surrender, of unconditional love, of alignment with the deepest truth of being. When he prayed, he did not ask for himself. He prayed for others, for everyone, for the elevation of human consciousness, because he knew that there is no real separation between self and others. In the field of the heart, everyone vibrates together. Every individual healing reverberates in the collective. Every word of light cast from the heart touches many other hearts, even in silence. This language has a frequency. It's the frequency of love, but not romantic love, nor affection conditioned by exchanges and expectations. The love that Jesus spoke of was radical, universal, absolute. A love that embraces the sinner and the saint, the sick and the healer, the traitor and the redeemer. A love that dissolves boundaries, tears veils, disarms resistances. This love doesn't need to be understood, it needs to be lived. And that's why the language of the heart is so transformative, because it addresses the most intimate part of the other, bypassing the defenses of the ego and speaking directly to the hidden truth in each being. Jesus knew that no word could heal if it didn't come from the heart. No gesture could elevate if it wasn't motivated by compassion. No prayer could reach heaven if it didn't originate from the vibration of love. In the canonical Gospels, there is a moving passage where Jesus, standing before Lazarus's tomb, weeps, not out of weakness, but out of empathy. He feels the pain of those around him. He feels the weight of loss. He feels the disconnection that death seems to represent. And his tear is a prayer. His silence is a cry. His presence is light. Then, he rises in prayer to the Father, not asking, but thanking. Thanking for knowing that he has already been heard. Because when prayer comes from the heart, time dissolves. The answer is already there. The manifestation is already underway. The heart does not wait. It trusts. It surrenders. It vibrates. And in that vibration, everything reorganizes, even death. The language of the heart is also the language of forgiveness, because forgiving is a vibrational act, not a rational one. It's not about accepting injustices, but about freeing oneself from the prison of resentment. Jesus taught forgiveness as a path to elevation. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. These words are not just historical, they are vibrational codes. By uttering them, Jesus activated the frequency of universal compassion, not to justify violence, but to dissolve hatred, because the heart, when elevated, harbors no poison. It transforms suffering into light. Forgiveness is not forgetting, it's alchemy. And this alchemy is only possible when prayer springs from a free heart, without desire for revenge, without the need to be right, only with the intention to love. The prayer made with the heart also heals because it reconnects the being with its vibrational essence. Illness often stems from the disconnection between the heart and the rest of the being. When the heart is not involved in what we experience, everything loses meaning. The body becomes sick. The mind exhausts. The spirit withdraws. Jesus healed not only with touches and words, but with the activation of the heart field. He saw the person beyond the disease. He saw the light behind the pain. He prayed with a heart so open that the very vibration of his presence restored order in the subtle bodies of the other. And this is still possible. The language of the heart is timeless. When we pray with the heart, even without knowing what to say, we are emitting the exact frequency for the universe to respond. Because the universe is, in its essence, made of love. Spiritual elevation is not an escape from the world, but a deep immersion into the heart. Ascending to the heavens is diving into one's own being. Jesus elevated himself in prayer not to escape the pain of the world, but to transform that pain into active compassion. He prayed not to abandon the earth, but to sow heaven within it. And this sowing began within him in the sacred temple of his own heart. He did not need external altars. His altar was the vibration of pure love. True spirituality is not in the formulas, but in the frequency. It is not in repetition, but in presence. And presence only becomes complete when the heart is involved. In the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, we find a Jesus who teaches the path of the soul through silence and inner listening. He guides the disciples to listen not to the voices of the world, but to the voice of the heart. The voice that does not deceive, does not manipulate, does not distort. The voice that guides, comforts, and awakens. This is the voice that speaks the divine language. When we pray with this listening, there is no distance between us and the divine. We become part of the whole. We become living prayer. We don't need to ask, we just need to be. And this full being is already an answer, already healing, already a miracle. The heart is also the point where all 7 voices integrate. It is within it that the voice of the body meets the spirit's, where emotion merges with intuition, where the word becomes light. The heart is the center of the cross, the intersection point between planes. That's why Jesus spoke so much about the heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. This is not a symbolic promise. It is a precise spiritual description. When the heart is clean, it vibrates at the frequency that allows one to see beyond the veil, beyond the illusion, beyond matter. The prayer made in this state is an open portal. It is a direct channel. It is revelation. The language of the heart also manifests in listening. Prayer is not just speaking. It's silencing to listen. And the heart listens differently than the mind. It perceives signs, intuitions, resonances. It recognizes truth not because it analyzes, but because it resonates with it. Jesus was a master in this kind of listening. He heard what others did not say. He felt what others did not understand. Because his listening was not mental, it was vibrational. He was in constant silent prayer, tuned into the divine beat. And this attunement allowed him to know, even without being informed, what to do, what to say, how to heal. The heart was his compass. And for this reason, his language was infallible. When we pray with the heart, we become mirrors of the divine. We reflect in our words, attitudes, and vibrations what is most elevated. We become the living presence of prayer. We become a channel, and this channeling is not for a select few, but for all who wish to open themselves. The language of the heart is not a privilege of the saints. It is the nature of the soul. It resides in every being, waiting to be awakened, and it takes only a moment of genuine surrender for it to begin to vibrate. A conscious breath, a gesture of compassion, a tear of surrender, a word of love spoken in truth. All of this is prayer. All of this is sacred language. All of this is a path to elevation. There is a point in the spiritual journey where words cease, thoughts quiet, and time loses meaning. A state where the being no longer seeks because it has already found itself. A space where prayer is no longer spoken, but lived, no longer directed towards something outside, but recognized as what we are. This point is the awakening of the seventh voice. It is not a sound that is pronounced, but a frequency that is embodied. It is the state of consciousness where all the previous voices of matter, emotion, mind, intuition, communion, creation, integrate and dissolve into a single presence. This presence is the Word made flesh. It is the original spark fully vibrating in the human body. Jesus reached this state. He did not just access the seventh voice, he became the seventh voice, and his invitation has always been clear. Follow me. That is, walk towards this same place within you, where the totality of your existence unifies with the divine. Awakening. This voice is not about accumulating knowledge, nor repeating formulas, nor practicing techniques. It's a process of profound emptying. It's the detachment from all the previous voices that, although sacred, still operate within some duality. The seventh voice is born when the self completely surrenders, when individuality bows before the vastness of the spirit, when the being stops trying to control, understand, resist, and simply surrenders to the eternal flow of life. This is not a passive state, but a silent action of the spirit. Jesus demonstrated this state in his presence, not in his speeches. He was so fully one with the whole that his own breath altered the environment. The energy that emanated from him was prayer in motion. He walked as light. He touched as healing. He spoke as effortless truth. Because the seventh voice has no intention to convince, it just is. The universal spiritual tradition describes this point as the mystical union, the sacred marriage, the return home. It's when the seeker finds what has always been inside them. It's when the inner temple is finally recognized as the dwelling place of the Most High. And then, all internal divisions cease. There is no longer conflict between reason and emotion, between body and soul, between action and contemplation. Everything becomes an expression of the same source. This state, despite being described by many mystics over the centuries, cannot be fully explained. It can only be experienced. And the key to accessing it is in inner silence, in the purification of intention, in total surrender to love without form, without name, without object. Jesus lived in this state. and therefore he performed miracles effortlessly. Because where the seventh voice resonates, reality obeys, for it recognizes the vibration of the origin. Awakening this voice requires traversing layers of illusion. The voice of fear needs to be silenced. The voice of desire needs to be understood. The voice of doubt needs to be embraced and dissolved. Each of these layers represents a veil that obscures the inner light, and each true spiritual practice removes one of these veils, not to reach something new, but to reveal what has always been there. The seventh voice is the essence of everything. It is the consciousness that observes without judging, that loves without clinging, that acts without identifying. When we awaken this voice, we no longer need to search for God. We realize that we have always been in Him. There is no longer a path because there is no longer distance. What remains is to live, fully, as an expression of unity. The apocryphal and Gnostic Gospels reveal that Jesus taught this truth only to the most prepared disciples. Not because he was elitist, but because this knowledge cannot be understood by a mind still immersed in ego. He said that those who had ears to hear would understand, because it's not about hearing with physical ears, but with an awakened heart. The seventh voice cannot be taught. It can only be awakened, and its awakening is the most intimate moment of the spiritual journey. A sacred instant where everything changes. Nothing external necessarily transforms, but the gaze changes, perception expands, the being elevates. Prayer ceases to be an isolated act and becomes a constant. Every breath, every step, every thought, everything vibrates in harmony with the whole. This state is not reserved for saints, avatars, or enlightened masters. It is available to everyone. The only requirement is the sincerity of the search and the willingness to die to the false self, because the ego does not enter this place. The seventh voice can only be heard when there is enough internal silence for the spirit to speak. And the spirit does not shout, it whispers. The one who quiets enough, who listens with the whole being, who prays with all body and soul, begins to perceive this voice emerging from within. At first, it's a slight impulse, a sense of clarity, a deep intuition. Then, it becomes a constant presence, until one day, it is no longer known where the self begins and the divine ends, because everything has merged, everything has become one. This fusion is what many have called enlightenment, ascension, the inner Christ. It is not an extraordinary event, but a natural state, the most natural of all. Everything that is not this is illusion. When the seventh voice awakens, the world remains the same, but the observer has transformed. And that's why everything changes. Perception is purified, suffering dissolves, anxiety quiets, the mind becomes clear, the heart expands, and life becomes a dance with the eternal. This is the living prayer, this is the true communion, not with words, but with being, not with gestures, but with frequency. Jesus lived in this state, and showed with his life that we can too, that we are not just followers of Christ, we carry the same light. The seventh voice is also the voice of the creative silence. It is the point where the sound ceases but the vibration remains. It is where the soul learns that it no longer needs to speak to be heard, nor to act to deserve. All that it is enough. Presence becomes sufficient. The inner light shines effortlessly. This silence is not emptiness, it is fullness. In it resides the wisdom that cannot be learned. In it lies the healing that does not come from outside. In it pulses the love that does not depend on an object. This silence is the sound of the word before it becomes a word. It is the sound that Jesus listened to when he withdrew to pray in solitude, the sound that guided his steps, his choices, his gestures. This sound cannot be taught, but it can be remembered, and the remembrance happens when the mind silences and the heart opens. At the highest point of the journey, there is no longer a need to meditate on God, to talk about God, to seek God, because everything is God. Every atom, every glance, every heartbeat. The seventh voice awakens when this perception is deeply rooted in the being, when there is no longer a separation between the spiritual and the everyday. Everything becomes an expression of the same source. Eating, walking, breathing, serving, loving. Everything is prayer. And this is the greatest achievement, not reaching heaven as a destination, but living it here, now, at the center of the being, in the body, in the moment. Jesus said, "The kingdom is among you," and also, "It is within you." The seventh voice is the sound of this kingdom manifested in human form. It is the sound that vibrates within those who have become mirrors of the eternal. Awakening this voice is, therefore, the greatest act of spiritual remembrance. It is recognizing oneself as a living temple of the Word, as a conscious channel of love, as a natural extension of light. There is no more effort. There is no more doubt. There is no more separation. Life becomes a celebration, not because everything is perfect in the external world, but because everything inside has found its place. And this place is the center, the spiritual heart where Christ dwells. Jesus came to awaken this in us, not to be worshipped, but to be understood as a model of what we are in essence. He was the living voice of the primordial sound, and when we listen to him with an awakened heart, we hear ourselves, our true self, eternal, luminous, loving, the one who always was, who always will be, and who, now, awakens, in silence, with the seventh voice. Mind unfettered, now that you have heard the seven voices, tell me in the comments, which one do you feel is already awakening within you? Or perhaps, which one still seems like a distant whisper, but you wish to hear more clearly? Share your perception. The collective manifestation begins when we make room to feel and express. Let's manifest together, in unison, this frequency of consciousness and love. Your experience could be the key that awakens another soul. And if you felt that something powerful was activated today, the next step is already prepared for you. Click now on the video that is on your screen. The Book of 33 Steps, the hidden map Jesus left for enlightenment. There you will discover the secret map left by Jesus, not only to ascend but to remain awake. Mind unfettered, we continue together. Because the truth sets you free, and you were born to remember.